Welcome back to the Old West Tales, where every story whispers secrets of love, heartbreak, and redemption. If you're new here, don't forget to subscribe. Drop your location in the comments. I'm curious which part of the world my viewers are from. Sit back and let me take you on a journey that might just melt your heart tonight. The railroad depot in Cheyenne, Wyoming territory smelled of coal smoke and disappointment. Clara Bennett clutched her worn carpet bag against her chest, standing perfectly still amid the chaos of arriving and departing passengers, trying to make herself invisible. Through the haze, she watched Caleb Thornton's broad back disappear into a waiting carriage, his new wife, the Real Miss Charlotte Whitmore from Boston, Massachusetts, chattering excitedly beside him. Clara had traveled 3 weeks from St. Louis, Missouri, to this dusty Wyoming town after answering an advertisement for a mail-order bride. She had sold everything she owned, said goodbye to the only friend she had in the world, and spent her last dollars on the train ticket. Caleb Thornton had been expecting a Miss Charlotte Whitmore, but somewhere between the letters and the journey, wires had crossed. Clara Bennett, a poor seamstress with no family and no prospects, had answered the same advertisement, and through some cruel twist of fate, both women had been summoned. When Caleb saw 2 women step off the train, his confusion had been immediate. Clara would never forget the way his face changed when he compared them. Miss Whitmore wore a fine traveling suit and matching hat. Her hands were smooth, and her smile carried confidence. Clara stood in a threadbare dress she had mended so many times that the fabric contained more patches than original cloth. Her hands were rough from years of work, and her posture carried uncertainty. "There's been a terrible mistake," Caleb had said, barely looking at Clara. "I can only marry one woman, and Miss Whitmore here has the references I require." Just like that, Clara's last hope crumbled. She stood frozen as the happy couple drove away, leaving her stranded 1,500 miles from anything resembling home, with $3 to her name and nowhere to go. The station began to empty as the afternoon stretched on. The ticket master had already looked at her suspiciously twice, likely wondering whether she intended to sleep on the bench. Clara knew she should move. She should find a boarding house and see whether they would allow her to work in exchange for a room. But her legs felt as heavy as lead. Shame burned in her chest. She was 26 years old, alone in the world, and apparently not even good enough for a man desperate enough to advertise for a wife. "Ma'am? Excuse me, ma'am." The voice was low and hesitant, carrying the soft drawl of the frontier. Clara looked up and found a man standing a respectful distance away, hat in his hands. He was tall and lean, with sun-weathered skin and dark hair badly in need of trim. His clothes were clean but worn, the clothes of a ranch hand who worked hard for a living. His face seemed kind. Tired, certainly, but kind. "I don't mean to intrude," he said, shifting awkwardly, "but I couldn't help noticing what happened earlier with Thornton." Clara's cheeks burned. "You saw that?" "Half the town saw it," he replied gently. "Thornton's never been known for discretion. I'm real sorry for how he treated you. That wasn't right." She nodded stiffly, not trusting herself to speak. She had learned long ago that kindness could undo a person faster than cruelty. The man seemed to wrestle with something, turning the brim of his hat between his fingers. Finally, he drew a deep breath. "My name's Ethan Walker. I've got a ranch about 8 miles north of town. It isn't much, but it's honest land and honest work." He paused and met her eyes. "I have twin daughters. They're 5 years old. Their mama passed away 2 years ago, and I've been trying to raise them by myself, but—" His words faded as he glanced toward his boots. When he spoke again, emotion roughened his voice. "I came into town today to place an advertisement for a wife, or at least somebody willing to help with the girls and the house. I've been putting it off for months. Kept trying to find the right words. Kept wondering how to ask a stranger to take on 2 wild little girls, a struggling ranch, and a man who doesn't say much and spends most of his days covered in dust and honest dirt." Clara's heart began to beat faster. "Then I saw you," Ethan continued. "I saw the way Thornton looked straight through you, like you didn't matter. But I also saw your face when you first stepped off that train, before you knew you'd been replaced. You looked hopeful, brave, like someone willing to take a chance on something difficult because the alternative was worse." He met her eyes again. "My girls need a mother like you." The words hung between them. Clara suddenly found it difficult to breathe. "I know this is sudden," Ethan said quickly. "I know you don't know me from Adam, and I know this whole situation has already broken your heart. I'm not asking you to decide anything right now, but if you need a place to stay while you figure out your next step, there's a spare room at the ranch. No obligations. You can meet the girls, see the place, and decide whether it's something you might tolerate. If not, I'll pay your train fare to wherever you want to go." Clara finally found her voice, though it came out much smaller than she intended. "Why me?" Ethan smiled faintly. "Because you're still standing here. Because you didn't cry or make a scene when Thornton humiliated you. Because you look like someone who knows how to survive hard times." He paused. "And because my daughters are hiding behind the station building right now." When they peeked around the corner and saw her looking, one of them whispered something and quickly disappeared again. "When they saw you," Ethan said, "Abigail told me you had a kind face. My girls have good instincts about people." Almost involuntarily, Clara glanced toward the corner of the depot building. Two identical pairs of dark eyes peered back at her from beneath matching braids before quickly disappearing again. "They came with you?" Clara asked. "Couldn't exactly leave them alone," Ethan said. "My nearest neighbor is 4 miles away. The girls go nearly everywhere with me." He sighed and shifted his hat. "I know it isn't proper, a strange man offering to take a woman home. If you'd rather, I can pay for a room at Mrs. Whitaker's boarding house of the night. You can think it over." Clara looked down at her carpet bag, then at the nearly empty station and the dusty street beyond. She thought about her $3. She thought about the long journey that had led nowhere. She thought about returning to St. Louis and asked herself a painful question. Returning to what? She had no family, no home, no prospects waiting there. But more than anything else, she thought about those two little faces peeking around the corner. She thought about a man who apologized for another man's cruelty. She thought about someone who had seen her standing alone and had not looked away. "I'd like to meet your daughters properly," she said. The relief that crossed Ethan's face was unmistakable. He turned toward the corner and called softly, "Abigail, Hannah, come on over." Two little girls emerged, identical in nearly every way Clara could see. They had their father's dark eyes and dark hair, but their faces still carried the softness of childhood. Their dresses were simple and carefully mended. Their braids were slightly crooked and tied with mismatched ribbons. "Girls, this is Miss Bennett," Ethan said. "Miss Bennett, these are my daughters. Abigail is older by 4 minutes, and Hannah is the one whose ribbon keeps coming loose." Hannah immediately reached up to check her braid, proving her father right. Abigail stepped forward first and studied Clara with serious eyes. "Papa says you came on the train to marry Mr. Thornton, but he picked someone else." The blunt honesty of a child hung in the air. "That was mean of him." "Abigail," Ethan said gently, but Clara raised a hand. "It's all right," she said. "She's not wrong." Hannah moved a little closer to her sister. "Are you sad?" Clara considered the question. "I was," she admitted. "Now I'm mostly tired and uncertain about what happens next." "You could come home with us," Hannah said immediately. "We have extra space. Papa made a bed in the spare room last month," Abigail added. "Just in case." "Just in case of what?" Clara asked. "Just in case someone needed it." Abigail replied simply, as though no further explanation was necessary. Ethan cleared his throat. "The wagon's just down the street. If you're willing, we could leave now and get home before dark." Clara surprised herself with her answer. "I'll come." The words felt right even as they left her lips. After all, what did she have left to lose? She was already as lost as a person could be. The wagon ride to the ranch was quiet at first. The girls sat in the back, whispering to one another, and occasionally asking Clara questions. Did she know how to braid hair properly? Could she make johnny cakes? Did she like horses? Clara answered honestly. Yes, she knew how to braid hair. She had learned in the orphanage where she grew up. Yes, she could make johnny cakes, though it had been years since she had the ingredients to do so. And no, she had never been close to a horse. You've never been close to a horse? Hannah asked, sounding shocked. Then how did you get anywhere? I mostly walked, Clara replied. or took the streetcars in St. Louis. Ethan glanced over at her. You grew up in an orphanage? Until I was 14. After that, I worked in a dress shop until the owner died and her son sold the business. Then I started taking sewing work from home. She did not mention the hunger. She did not mention how close she had come to sleeping on the streets. She did not mention how factory-made clothing had slowly destroyed opportunities for independent seamstresses. The advertisement seemed like a chance for something different, she finished quietly. I'm sorry Thornton wasted that chance, Ethan said. Clara looked out across the landscape, rolling past them. The land seemed endless, vast, beautiful in a way that made her chest ache. Nothing about it resembled the crowded streets she had known. Mountains rose in the distance, purple against the western sky. The air smelled clean and sharp. Maybe he didn't waste it, she said softly. Ethan looked at her. Maybe it just led somewhere different. By the time they reached the ranch, the sun hung low on the horizon, painting the world gold. The house was small, built from rough timber, with a stone chimney rising from one end. Nearby stood a bar and a corral. Beyond them, cattle grazed lazily in the fading light. The IT wasn't much, just as Ethan had promised, but it was cared for. Inside, the house was simple and clean. The main room served as both kitchen and living area. A sturdy table sat near a wood-burning stove. Shelves lined the walls, holding mismatched dishes gathered over years of necessity rather than design. 2 small bedrooms opened off one side of the house. Ethan led Clara to a third room. It was barely larger than a closet, but it contained a real bed, a handmade quilt, and a window that looked toward the distant mountains. It isn't fancy, Ethan said from the doorway, but it's yours for as long as you need it. Clara set down her carpetbag and ran her hand across the quilt. The stitching was beautiful, tiny and perfectly even. Did your wife make this? She asked. My mother, Ethan replied. She passed 5 years ago. It was supposed to be for guests, but we've never really had any. That evening, Clara helped prepare supper. The meal was simple, beans, cornbread, and coffee, but as they ate, she watched Ethan interact with his daughters. He was patient, gentle. When Hannah spilled her milk, he simply cleaned it up and poured another cup. When Abigail launched into a long, rambling story about a frog she had found near the creek, he listened as though every word mattered. Yet Clara also noticed something else. Exhaustion. It lingered behind his eyes. His shoulders sagged whenever he thought nobody was watching. He looked like a man carrying a burden too heavy for one person. After the girls finally went to bed, a process involving 3 bedtime stories, 2 glasses of water, and 1 mysterious thumping sound that Ethan assured her was perfectly normal, they sat at the kitchen table drinking coffee. Ethan stared into his cup. I should explain something, he said quietly, about my wife, about why I'm looking for help. You don't owe me an explanation, Clara replied. I think I do, especially if you're considering staying. He drew a slow breath. My wife's name was Rebecca. She was a good woman, a good mother, but she never really took to ranch life. She grew up in Denver, Colorado, and she missed the city. His voice grew rough. When the girls were born, she struggled. 2 babies at once. No nearby family. No help. Me working every hour I could just to keep the ranch alive. He paused. She got sad. Real sad. In a way I didn't understand until it was too late. One winter day, Ethan continued, his eyes fixed on the coffee in his cup, she walked out into a snowstorm and never came back. Silence settled over the room. We found her 3 days later. Clara's hand moved slowly across the table, stopping just short of his. I'm so sorry. Ethan nodded. The girls were only 3. They don't remember much about her. Some days I think that's a blessing. Other days I think it's the saddest thing in the world. He gave a weary sigh. I've tried to be enough for them, but I'm not. They need someone who can teach them things I can't. Someone who can be here when I'm out fixing fences or moving cattle. Someone who won't. His voice faltered. He swallowed hard. Someone who won't leave them. Clara understood immediately. You're afraid I'll leave too. Ethan gave a humorless smile. I'm afraid of a lot of things, but mostly I'm afraid of failing those girls again, of not giving them what they need. Clara looked around the little kitchen. She thought about the girls sleeping in the next room. She thought about the worried rancher sitting across from her. And she thought about herself, about all the years she had spent feeling unwanted, invisible, forgotten. "Ethan," she said softly, "I've never been a mother. I've never lived on a ranch. I know absolutely nothing about cattle, horses, or any of this." He listened quietly. "But I do know what it feels like to be alone." She paused. "I know what it feels like to be frightened and have nobody to depend on." Another pause. "And I know what it feels like when people look at you as though you don't matter." Their eyes met. "Your daughters looked at me like I mattered." Her voice softened further. "You looked at me like I mattered." The words hung between them. "If you're willing to take a chance on a woman with no experience and no references, except the fact that she's somehow survived this long, then I'm willing to take a chance on this place." She smiled nervously. "On them?" Then, after a moment, "On you." Ethan's eyes brightened. "You mean it?" "I'll try," Clara said carefully. "I can't promise I'll be good at any of this, but I can promise I'll do my best. And I can promise I won't disappear in the middle of the night." For a moment, he seemed unable to speak. Finally, he nodded. "That's all I could ask for." His voice was thick with emotion. "Truth be told, it's more than I had any right to hope for." He stood as though intending to leave, then sat down again. "We should probably talk about arrangements. About marriage. I mean, I'm not expecting—" "One step at a time," Clara interrupted gently. A faint smile appeared on her face. "Let's see whether I can avoid burning down your kitchen first." For the first time that evening, Ethan laughed. The following weeks proved both harder and easier than Clara expected. The work never ended. There was cooking, cleaning, laundry, mending, and caring for two energetic 5-year-old girls who had spent much of the last 2 years practically raising themselves. The twins tested her constantly, not out of malice, out of fear. They wanted to know whether she would stay, whether she could be trusted, whether she would vanish like their mother had. Abigail was a serious one, protective, observant. She watched Clara carefully, studying every action. Hannah was the opposite, wild, fearless, forever climbing things she shouldn't climb, wandering places she shouldn't wander, and returning covered in mud with frogs, rocks, or strange treasures hidden in her pockets. Clara quickly learned to inspect every pocket before washing clothes. She learned that Abigail disliked beans but would eat them willingly if Clara told stories during supper. She learned that Hannah suffered nightmares and would only calm down if someone sang softly beside her bed. She learned that Ethan woke before sunrise every morning and often returned long after dark. He was a man of few words, but many kindnesses. Fresh water appeared beside her wash basin before she ever thought to ask. Broken furniture somehow repaired itself overnight. Wildflowers showed up on the kitchen table with no explanation whatsoever. Slowly, Clara discovered another truth. Ethan blamed himself for Rebecca's death. He carried the guilt everywhere he went, like stones in his pockets, and little by little, something unexpected happened. For the first time in her life, Clara began to feel as though she belonged somewhere. 2 months after her arrival, on a warm Sunday afternoon, Ethan took the girls to inspect a distant pasture. Clara sat on the porch mending one of Hannah's dresses. The child seemed capable of destroying clothing at a rate normally associated with cavalry soldiers and ammunition. She heard the wagon before she saw it. A strange flutter stirred inside her chest when Ethan finally appeared around the bend in the road. The girls practically launched themselves from the wagon. Both seemed excited about something. Together, they helped Ethan carry a large bundle into the house. A few minutes later, Ethan returned and sat beside Clara on the porch steps. "We brought something for you." "For me?" the girls insisted. Moments later, Abigail and Hannah emerged carrying the bundle. When they opened it, Clara gasped. Inside lay several yards of beautiful fabric in rich shades of blue and green, enough to make an entirely new dress. "Papa said you only have 2 dresses," Hannah announced proudly, "and they're both old. So we got you new fabric." Abigail added, "I picked the colors because they match your eyes." Clara could barely speak. She stared at the expensive cloth, then at Ethan. "It's too much." His expression softened. It's not enough. Her throat tightened. You've given us so much, Clara. His voice was quiet. You made this place feel like a home again. He glanced toward the girls. They're happy. A pause. Truly happy. Another pause. For the first time since Rebecca died. His gaze returned to hers. And I'm happy, too. He hesitated. Much happier than I ever thought I'd be again. At that moment, Abigail climbed into Clara's lap, something she'd begun doing often during the previous few weeks. Will you stay forever? The question struck Clara straight in the heart. She wrapped her arms around the little girl and looked at Ethan over her shoulder. I'd like to. Ethan smiled. More than all right. Abigail settled comfortably in Clara's lap, while Hannah leaned against Ethan's shoulder. I'd like to stay forever, Clara said softly, if that's all right with everyone. More than all right, Ethan replied. His rough hand found hers between them on the porch step. Clara, I know we agreed to take things slowly, but there's something I need to tell you. His voice grew quieter. I love you. The words seemed to stop the world. Maybe it's too soon. Maybe I should wait longer. But I can't keep it to myself anymore. He swallowed. You don't have to feel the same way. I'll understand if you don't. I just needed you to know. Hannah climbed into her father's lap, and for a moment the four of them sat together beneath the afternoon sun, like a family that had somehow always belonged together. Tears filled Clara's eyes. I love you too. The words came easily. Honestly, I love all of you. She looked from Ethan to the girls. I didn't know it was possible to feel this way. I didn't know something like this existed. Abigail immediately sat upright. Does that mean you'll marry Papa? Clara laughed through her tears. Is he asking? I'm definitely asking, Ethan said quickly. That made everyone laugh. Their wedding took place 1 month later in the small white church outside Cheyenne. Nearly the entire community attended. Clara wore a beautiful dress she had sewn herself from the blue and green fabric Ethan and the girls had given her. For weeks, she had worked on it by lamplight after everyone else was asleep. Abigail and Hannah wore matching dresses and proudly scattered wildflowers down the aisle. When the preacher asked whether anyone objected to marriage, Caleb Thornton, who had attended more out of social obligation and affection, shifted uncomfortably in his seat, but he remained silent. At the celebration afterward, Mrs. Whitaker, the owner of the boarding house, pulled Clara aside. I knew the moment I saw you at that depot that you were meant for something good. She smiled warmly. Ethan Walker is a fortunate man. Clara glanced across the room. Ethan was attempting to dance while both girls stood on his boots, making the effort awkward and hilarious. A smile spread across her face. I think I'm a fortunate one. Mrs. Whitaker chuckled. Maybe you're both fortunate. She nodded knowingly. Maybe that's how the best marriages work. Years passed. The ranch prospered. The cattle herd grew. New barns were built. New fields were fenced. And the Walker family grew as well. Abigail and Hannah became young women. They helped care for younger brothers and sisters who filled the house with noise, laughter, and endless activity. Clara's dark hair slowly gained silver strands. Deep lines appeared around Ethan's eyes. Yet neither of them minded. One evening, many years later, they sat together on the same porch where Ethan had first confessed his love. The sun was setting beyond the Wyoming hills. Children's voices drifted across the yard. Ethan reached over and took Clara's hand. Do you ever wonder what would have happened if Caleb Thornton had chosen you? Clara looked out across everything they had built. The ranch, the house, the children, the grandchildren already beginning to appear. The man sitting beside her. The man who had seen her when everyone else had looked right through her. She smiled. Not once. Not even a little. She shook her head. Not even for a moment. Her voice was certain. Being rejected at that train station was the best thing that ever happened to me. She squeezed his hand. It brought me exactly where I was meant to be. Ethan smiled. My twins needed a mother like you. The words echoed the ones he had spoken all those years ago at the depot. Then he added quietly, but I think maybe I needed you even more. Clara leaned her head against his shoulder. We needed each other. Every one of us. Ethan agreed. And Clara knew that was a complete truth. She had crossed half a continent seeking a marriage that never happened, only to discover a family she never knew she was searching for. Sometimes the wrong train carries you to the right destination. Sometimes rejection is only a different path toward happiness. And sometimes a cowboy's quiet words at a dusty Wyoming depot become the beginning of everything that truly matters. Bottom of form. I love all of you, my wonderful audience of Wild West Tales. Tell me how this story made you feel. Leave a comment below. Type 1 if you love this story. And do not forget to subscribe to the channel for more epic tales from the wild.